Folks, welcome to episode 3, The Secrets to Happy Patients and Medical Staff Unveiled with Joe Nieto, Customer Engagement Manager at Element Blue. In this episode, we'll explore the current healthcare challenges our society faces and how conversational AI is helping solve a big part of these issues. We will take you on an exploration journey through industry-specific case studies to discover how this technology is utilized for the healthcare system, how it's going to improve patient care, how it streamlines communication, and how it improves efficiency as well. Our guest today will share with you some great advice and lessons learned from successfully implementing conversational AI projects in multiple organizations. We will also look to the future trends and share some thoughts on how you best can leverage the power of conversational AI to enhance patients and medical staff's experience alike. Welcome, Joe.
Well, hi, everybody. What a pleasure to see everybody here and just share a little bit about what we picked up. As Kieran said, my name is Joe Nieto. I am Director of Customer Engagement here at Element Blue. And we have been working in healthcare for the past 20 years and bringing lots of improvements and innovation to healthcare. And I hope we can talk about some of those topics today.
Joe, I suspect you and I could talk for quite some time today, and that's the bit that I'm actually looking forward to in this show. I'm a little bit curious. Would you mind just telling us in a little bit more detail about who your customers are and how do you use conversational AI to create value for them? You don't have to mention customers, but just give us a little bit of a flavor for the audience so they understand where value can be created.
Sure. So one of the important things that we focus on in our neck of the woods in our healthcare practice is that we work on the provider side. So when folks come into the hospital or into the clinics, those are the people we're interacting with, not so much with the financial people that handle the claims and processing. Now, don't get me wrong, we do a lot of that, but what we're talking about today, especially with conversational stuff, is the part that faces the physician, the nurses, the human aspect that deals with the patients.
Oh, fantastic. Well, little question then. What are the challenges they're experiencing, and what are you doing with conversational AI to help address some of those challenges for them?
Sure, absolutely. So, just kind of conservatively speaking, and I hear stats all over the place, we are roughly about 5 million physicians short on where we are and where we should be. I can't even tell you how many nurses we're missing in the field. And so all these, we have to figure out a way either to produce more nurses and doctors, which would be great. I can't help there, but what I can help with is with the efficiency of these valuable resources and how they interact with patients. We're getting to the point where conversational AI and some of the technology that we're building here can really help handle the patients that are coming in, some of the patient load. So when the physician or the nurse is brought into the conversation, the conversational AI has handled a lot of that information, a lot of the interaction that and sometimes becomes routine depending on the mission. We have different applications, have different missions. We have some that are, I believe in November, I was talking about our rooming process where we have sort of a funnel coming through where folks have telemedicine appointments coming up, and just like when you go to see a provider, there's somebody there to greet you, usually with a clipboard. Why are you visiting with us? What's your height and weight? Any pain? You have these standard questions they go through, and those are things that conversational bots are really good at because they can ask those questions in different languages, ask those questions, and then collect that data. So when the nurse or the provider comes online, they already have a leg up on the conversation.
Wow, because that's interesting there because you build a couple of things there. The figure of 5 million is truly shocking,
Yeah.
because you're immediately thinking, well, my goodness, there's not enough professionals to do the work. But the folks who are currently working must be under a tremendous amount of pressure as well. They're now covering the workload for 5 million colleagues who aren't actually there. That's kind of scary.
It is. And so the industry we have folks that are getting burned out. The top two reasons nurses leave is going to be there's a staff shortage, where they're having to cover extra shifts. They have more patients they can actually see, and it's getting into the second reason. A lot of the folks that are leaving the profession is that the work-life balance piece of it, because they're working these 12, 14-hour days. During COVID, we had so many nurses and physicians. I mean, everybody in the front, I should say, everybody from nursing to physicians to janitorial. There's a lot that goes on in hospital systems and clinics that the general public only sees one piece of it, and that's the facing part. But there's an army of people that make sure everything happens, from like I mentioned, janitorial folks that go in and then change out the rooms, change out the bedding and all that stuff, to food preparation, dietitians, pharmacy. All those folks make the whole thing work together.
Wow. I wonder if we're kind to those individuals when we're at hospitals, or possibly not.
We try to be, right?
No,
we focus.
As patients, we should be, or as customers of the service, we should be. I don't know if we've always got the patience from some of the stories I'm seeing in the press, but you don't realize just beyond the front end how many people are involved and the pressures that they're under. Because healthcare staff, they went into the profession for a particular reason, and that was to provide care, but that sounds like an assembly line as opposed to an actual caring moment that you want to share with another human being who cares deeply about your health and well-being.
And that's a good point, Kieran, because it has come to the point where we have EMRs, electronic medical records, EMR systems that help manage for the financial side, right? We want to make sure that the appointment is documented, that the drugs that are administered are tracked, that all the symptoms, all that stuff. So what ends up happening is that the physician or the nurse are sitting there keying this information, looking down at their keyboard, typing in, instead of having a face-to-face conversation like we are, and say, tell me more about what's ailing you. Tell me about this pain. How long have you been feeling this pain? And you become a little bit more tied into the patient, right, in their experience. They want to feel like you are there to see them. You're not there to fill out a keyboard, and there's a long list of information that comes in. And there's a lot of valid reasons that information is collected: financial, legal, medical history, claim justification, all these things that come into play, that there's a reason we have to do that. But if we can offload that part of it and let them focus on the patient, it's so much better for everybody.
Just thinking there as well, it opens up the opportunity for lots of, I call them inadvertent errors, because no medical professional wants to make a clinical misdiagnosis or establish
a
patient's needs and a tablet that they don't need. So Joe, give us some examples of some of the conversational AI applications or items that you have built to help alleviate at least some of this pressure.
Sure, absolutely. One of the ones that we're pretty proud of is our rooming bot that handles a conversation from the time that somebody joins into the telemedicine appointment. We know who that person is at the other end of the conversation. We've identified, we pulled up the medical records, and we know specifically which clinic they're there for, oncology, radiology, behavioral, or whatever clinic it is. So we walk these folks through the process. I mentioned earlier we collect some demographic information, just height, weight, that kind of stuff. But depending on the clinic, we get specific into the questions. We may ask questions about their extremities. We might ask questions about, are their hands feeling cold? We may ask questions about that they sleep well. We may ask questions about, on some of the psychological stuff. We may ask, are you interacting with folks on a regular basis? Are you leaving the home? There's 1,001 types of questions that we go through, but what makes it really valuable is that it focuses on the type of clinic that they're coming into, so that when the when the nurse does come on the line, she has a list of all the different replies, and the 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 virtual assistant is smart enough to know that, oh, there's some trigger responses that I should look for, and it can flag it on the transcript that they're able to look at, so that instead of rereading and regurgitating everything that just answered, they can go directly to the problem areas.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot because that sounds quite targeted as
Yeah,
well, as opposed to just answering a laundry
right.
list that would make you feel as a patient, or maybe the patient's family, like
Sure.
they're part of a machine, not part of a health
Yeah,
care system.
exactly. And it helps both ways, right? When the when the patient comes online, and let's say they have an appointment at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that appointment is going to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The virtual assistant is there, willing and waiting, and it starts to, so they know at 2 o'clock their appointment's there, not 2:05, not 2:10, not waiting for somebody to get freed up. They starts right on time, and they feel like, okay, I'm engaged, I'm on time, I know I'm going to get through this procedure. And then on the provider side, because a lot of these questions are already done, they can cycle through people a lot more than an hour. Usually it's what, 15-minute increments. We can maybe get, I don't know, 10 to 15, maybe 20% more folks through the queue than we could before, because a lot of this stuff is already pre-answered, and they are reading those responses as quickly as they come in. Boom, you come in, know exactly, especially you have a surgical follow-up where it's just not a lot of this back and forth. Maybe you've had some surgery, you're going to do some follow-up, you come in, you have a conversation with the physician. They're going to ask the same questions. Any fever, any redness? Are you changing the bandages on a regular basis? Do you need any care? We can send videos out to you to show you how to change the wound. We can ask those questions where we can get ahead of an infection or any kind of that kind of problem, and also highlight it for the physician so they can see and have some answers right away.
I kind of love that. I've done a lot of work with contact centers, and just
Yeah,
when you put that in my head, so the first 5 minutes we're collecting data, which
yeah,
meant, in the hospital context, healthcare context,
right.
and that is technically a waste of time. It's vital, but if it
Yeah,
can be done by technology, let the tech do it. So then that healthcare professional, as you say, one can put more people into an hour, but
yeah,
two, rather than doing the admin piece, which is automatable, then
right.
they've more time to do the care piece, which is what the
Abs-
patient and they want to do as well. It sounds like a win-win.
Absolutely. And one thing that I don't touch enough on is that the virtual assistants are multilingual, right? So if we know the patient is English is not their primary language, maybe it's Spanish or French, we can start that conversation in their language. And you already broken down some barriers, some cultural barriers, where I'm like, oh, let me read this English, what it's asking me, and try to determine what's the right answer. And so if I can present that in their native language, and have those prompts and responses so they're clear as possible. It's either a yes or a no, it's or a number or a date, a kind of response, right? So we're not going to ask a long, question that's going to generate a paragraph and then it's going to ramble on, right? We want a very clear and precise answer.
I like that. It's interesting because I went for it, just reminded me of something else.
Mhm.
You forget how valuable that is. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you another question because that's prompted something else in my head. I went to a surgery recently for a COVID injection,
Oh, goodness.
and the patient couldn't speak English.
Right.
And I think they were new to Ireland. And what happened was it took about 20 minutes for the doctor, using Google or whatever it was on their phone, to explain that they needed to get a translator, that they needed to rebook an appointment. So it
Yes.
ended up the nurse couldn't actually spend, the 5 minutes that she wanted with that patient. It was 20. Everybody else got delayed. The meeting had to be reset. And therefore, the person who was there to get their COVID injection had to go and not get it and go with their family and organize another meeting. So you can start to see how all those inefficiencies
Sure.
appear by not having a multilingual interface.
Absolutely. And that is, I tell you, that's been one of the biggest responses we've gotten from folks, because they're, at first it's kind of novel. It's like, oh wow, look at this, it's speaking in whatever language, yeah. And then you come in, and it's after a while they really latch on to this, right? Because there's no vagueness. It's like you're dependent on the patient's mastery of their English language to understand what we're asking. We can just ask them in their native language and get a better, clearer response.
But it must be more personal as well, as opposed to you're coming in and someone's insisting you speak English.
Yes.
That starts with the care part, taking
Yeah.
care of the experience of the patient right from the very beginning.
Right.
Joe, you must have learned a lot as you've rolled out conversational AI. My next question,
Mhm.
what are the 3 or 4 biggest lessons that you have learned having implemented lots and lots of healthcare conversational AI solutions?
Sure. Um, I think looking at the end product instead of how we're necessarily going to get there. I generally go into these meetings just going, tell me what we want to be. Leave how I'm going to solve the problem to my team and myself. Just tell me where you want to see. Give me this big visualization, this big picture, because I'm very upfront. I think you always have to be very upfront with the clinical folks. They're at the top in their industry. They're at the top of their game. They're operating at the top of their license. And we're coming in, as IT developers and everything, right? And I always tell them, look, I work with a lot of folks like you, but I'm just a visitor. I am just temporarily walking in your shoes. After I leave, you're going to have to live in this world with what we build. So I want to look at this big picture along with you and go, where do we want to be? What do you want to see? What does that feel like? What is that experience going to be like? For you as a clinician, for you as a patient, for you as a doctor or a provider, what is your role in these things, and where are we getting to? And I want back from what we have, right? Because if I tell you, look, I've got 5 pieces of data, and this is all I can give you, that's not going to help. I mean, it may solve that problem, but it won't get you on board with owning the solution. Because I feel if we start at the end, and like I said, I'm very upfront. Look, I am not an MD, but I'll walk with you, right? And I think if you have that kind of partnership early on in the process, where we all know we're in this together, then I think that boosts your success rate way up.
I might refer to you as the MD for the rest of this show, because by the sounds of things, you
Dr.
actually you have a lot of experience, Dr. Nieto. By the way,
Yeah,
those folks listening in, Joe is
yeah.
not a medical professional, so please don't reach out for medical advice. But do the doctors believe what you're saying? Because you're
I,
walking
yeah,
in
I
as a
think you do.
technology professional and saying, I can give you everything that you've ever dreamed of.
Yeah, I think from the perspective, I think there's 2 things that really work in our favor quite a bit. Is one is we listen intently. We listen, even though we may have heard it before. We don't want to make any assumptions, because there's a reason hospital A is better than hospital B, which is way above hospital C. And it's they're all seeing patients, they're all treating different diseases and stuff. It becomes down to the execution and operations piece of it, how efficient they are with getting results, their communication back to the patient. Is a patient engaged? That makes this hospital better than the other. So we focus on that as well, right? What are we doing to take care of the patient? What are we doing to help facilitate this as efficiently as possible? And
I
so,
kind of think you've a wonderful bedside manner as a tech IT technician.
well, I try to be. I think the other thing that is helpful, I think, is that we 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 ask for their opinions. We do. They're very involved in the design. They're very involved in the delivery piece of this. And to a T, everyone I've ever worked with has gone, I don't know the answer, but I can find it. Or I can, let's get together. Let's do some whiteboarding. We'll do a ton of whiteboarding, not only from me educating them, because you're drawing lines and circles. Here's where things are happening. But on their side, they're going, oh, that's great if you're a computer, but I'm dealing with people, especially in pediatrics. Pediatrics is, it's like other hospitals. Everything is smaller, everything's more complicated because the patients are smaller. You have mixed units, mixed family units. You have mom and dad, maybe one mom, maybe two dads. You have different types of situations that you have to deal with and allocate, be able to work with. So when you're working in a telemedicine, it's extremely important you identify who's on the other side of the conversation. And is that person who's on the side of the conversation the patient, authorized to speak from the patient? So those bring challenges that aren't as common in other hospitals.
See, that's interesting for me because very often, sometimes folks consider IT as a cold technology. But
Yeah.
that sounds, Joe, like
Yeah.
the technology is very much an empathetic part of everybody's experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that has to, the solutions that reflect, we constantly have to remind ourselves, why are we there? We're trying to heal patients. We're trying to make as efficient as possible. The process is for somebody who's there on the worst day of their life, right? Mom and dad are coming through the worst day of their life. Their child is injured. They're coming to the hospital. They're going to an emergency room. How can we get them through that process as quickly and as smoothly as possible? If it's virtual assistants, that we have kiosks when they walk into the emergency room, that they can enter their information so that it's up to the front as quickly as possible. And we ask those questions that can triage those people so that they move up in the line ahead of somebody with that has a cold. Maybe not as, it's important, but maybe not as much as your child is just unconscious, barely breathing, bleeding out. Those need to get attention as quickly as possible.
See, having sat with young kids in hospitals, not
Yeah.
having any communication, that's not a criticism of the doctors.
Right.
They were just so busy. See, actually having that thing to do and feeling like you're contributing to solving the medical issue, that as a parent, I know, to me, were conversational AI in that process, I would have been delighted, because there's nothing, as you say, scarier than your child being ill and you not knowing what to do, not knowing who to talk to, or understanding any part of the process or being able to contribute to it.
Yep. The other use case, you were talking about the interesting use cases that we're working on. Another one that we're working on has to do with new moms, mothers that are, it's a first baby, new delivery. We're still on the board with this thing. The technology is there. Not even worried about the technology, not even worried about the conversational pieces of it. It's like, what is this content we're going to deal with? And the mission is, you're a brand new mom and you're a brand new family, right? You brought your child home, your baby home, and there's no operating manual. You're literally, oh, okay, what do I do now, right? Who would you reach to at 2:00 in the morning when the baby can't sleep? Who would you reach? Who would you reach out? So there's a need for a virtual assistant that's available to say, let me log in, let me tell her who I am. I've got my baby records here. I can see I'm dealing with I don't know, a child that's pretty normal. Maybe it's having some kind of other issues, nutrition or something, and you can start the conversation with it and say, hey, baby's not sleeping well. Last time I fed, and the bot can go back and forth and get some information and help you decide whether, hey, maybe we should be coming into the emergency room. Maybe the bot can go ahead, this sounds pretty important based on what you've told me. Let me connect you somebody live to address that situation. Or the other time is, look, this is perfectly normal. These are the kind of things to expect. So those are the ones we're working on now. And if you can imagine, like I said, the bots are going to be available 24-hour, 365, 7 days a week, and to be able to have these conversations and help help the new families get through the early years might be really important for them.
Joe, where were you 18 years ago when my son was born? By the way, if I had a bot to work out my thinking about him at the moment, that
Right.
might be useful. I don't think your need for advice never changes. Let me ask you the next question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you were advising other companies or healthcare providers that were looking at implementing conversational AI, what would your advice be to them?
I think that the central point of everything, especially when it comes up to design, is to focus on the conversation, focus on how the user patient on the other end, in my case is patients, but maybe it's a new customer, visualize how their conversation journey will take place. And that's really, I mean, we have whiteboards and sticky notes, and we go, here's where the conversation comes in. Here's the multiple branches that they'll be able to take, and where are these eventually going to go, right? So spend your time on the design piece of it, and then the follow up to that would be focus on the metrics. I can't say enough to go, where are my customers, patients spending their time when they come in through the virtual agent and they have these engagements going on? Where's everybody going? Where's my time being spent? Monitor your metrics that tell you somebody put an answer that was unexpected and we couldn't resolve it. They give you an answer you wouldn't expect it. And we track those, right? We know when somebody put something in and you kind of go, huh, the next time I see this kind of response, I want them to go to this journey. I want them to go to this pathway. Or maybe it's something that, more people are asking about this that I don't have a response for. So I should really build something that next time they ask, I have an answer. So focus on the conversational design piece of it. The technology is going to take care of itself. We've got really wonderful products these days, and making sure that the product implementation is smooth, of course, from an IT perspective, but from a design perspective, the conversational impact is probably where I would spend my time.
I love that advice. My final question then,
Mhm.
are you seeing any trends within conversational AI or the conversational AI industry that are
Yeah,
going to have a really big impact in the years to come?
I think this chat GPT business for clinical, I think it's going to have a large impact, right? And I think the way that we look at it is it's the source, So, what Chat GPT has over a lot of different products is that it can actually hold that conversation and be contextual, right? But from the clinical perspective, if you come in and you go, oh, I have a patient, age 2, yellowing eyes, running temperature, you give all these symptoms, right? And it says, you've got, the patient has jaundice, something like that. And you kind of go, well, that's great, but it does, you don't know where it got the answer from, and you don't know if that answer is correct, and at some point that's going to have to be weighed out, but I like where it's going. I think it's pretty monumental in the way that it's going to be handling conversations, right? It still has a ways to go. So I don't want to say that, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough to let's continue building on this thing. But I really see that. And I really see the conversational piece of it taking less and less on the keyboards. Because you and I can have a conversation. We're not going to be typing back and forth the responses. And in the clinical setting, if I have an ambient microphone hanging down, I can say, hey, whatever the wake up word is, hey Joe, hey Joe, schedule me a blood test for my patient, right? And contextually, it knows who you are, the provider. It knows your patient because it knows it's in this room. It knows who the patient is. It knows who all the attendees are, and it can say, I can just tell it, hey, order a blood test, and it it would be able to run an automation to generate that test, write all the documentation, fill all the paperwork that usually a medical transcriber is sitting there on their little keyboard writing it. So more efficiency, faster, more accurate. And and we have that working in the lab. But we've got to work. We've got to get it out. Yeah.
Hey, tell me, is it the Star Trek lab? Because again, it sounds like this is literally way ahead of its time.
I think when we get closer to clinical research, diagnoses, those kind of things, I think we're going to see some really big improvements in that area. And I'll tell you, that's going to be extremely helpful, because as a human being, physician, researcher, nurse, it is absolutely almost impossible to keep up in all the latest publications, right? Because you're spending your time seeing people. You don't have time to go read research, the latest research from New England, Journal of Medicine, and go, oh wow, they got new treatment for COVID. Oh, they've got a new treatment for a heart condition. It's impossible, just about. So if you are able to take conversationally, and I think this is where the skill is going to be coming from the physician. I kind of see how in developers we deal with if then else, programmers. I think that skill is moving over to the folks that are working with these things. The way that you ask a question will be how we program these languages, or how we interact with these systems. So if I ask a particular question one way, I may get a different response, or slightly different response if I ask a different way. So we have to train ourselves to ask questions that are as clear as possible, because we kind of know what the response should be. And the best way to do it is if you were to talk to Alexa and you go, hey Alexa, blah blah blah, right? And it goes, well, I don't understand what you just said, right? And so you find yourself, Alexa, and then you enunciate every little phrase, or you say it a different way, and then it gives it a response, right? And you kind of go, oh, all right, that's what I wanted. The next thing, so you programmed yourself to ask the question in a specific way. And I think that's where we're going to see some trade-off coming off. We're going to be smarter about the way that we ask these questions, because we pretty much know what the response is going to be looking like.
I might explain why I got laundry deodorant ordered when I was trying to get Alexa to turn on a light. But that could be a very dodgy Irish accent as well. So we don't know what it is. Joe,
Right.
Absolute pleasure, sir, talking to you. And thank you so much for taking the time to share all that wisdom. I never realized the number of uses for conversational AI. That was a pleasure. Although I have to warn you, at one stage when you were talking about whiteboarding and following the physicians, then you lent into pediatrics and new babies, and I thought, how far do you go for your job, Joe, to monitor everything that's happening? I'm delighted you have such dedication to your profession. I think as a IT doctor, I think you're right up there at the top of the medical profession. But look, thank you so much indeed for taking the time and coming to talk to us today.
Thank you so much.